Hello everyone, my name is Ed Mitchell, recurring podcast guest over at 4playernetwork.com, and this is my top 10 games of 2022. The Case of the Golden Idol was one of the last games I played in 2022. Short, sweet, and to the point, it is, for all practical purposes, a detective game. You're tasked with exploring different chapters of a story centered around a magical artifact, the Golden Idol. With a mixture of talking to people, tapping keywords, and good old deductive reasoning, you piece together the people in each scene, their inner motivations, and what happened to them. What starts as a simple murder over greed becomes an interweaving narrative of secret societies, political intrigue, and plain old jealousy. As soon as I picked it up, I was enthralled by the Golden Idol's storytelling, and each chapter kept me wanting more. I spent basically the entirety of a 4-hour plane ride playing this game on my fancy new Steam Deck, and I could not put it down. However, it was in the final chapter of the game where, using context clues of the previous chapters, you piece together the entire story from start to finish. It's handled in such a way that you feel both accomplished if you notice certain details, but not silly for missing them. I walked away feeling glad that I experienced such expert storytelling and game design. Return of the Obra Dinn is one of my favorite games of all time, and it's featured in my top 30 favorite games video I released last year. And while it certainly isn't as high of a pinnacle, The Case of the Golden Idol was a striking visual and mental experience throughout. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the culmination of two of my favorite JRPGs ever. Xenoblade 1 had one of the best stories I've ever experienced in video games. Its twists and turns, foreshadowing, and cliffhangers are what has become a mainstay in the series. Xenoblade 2 broke the mold by adding a controversial gacha system that somehow managed to thread the needle of rewarding and not overly frustrating. Unlocking the special blades in that game allowed you to customize your party to mix and match and handle almost any scenario thrown at you. The story of Xenoblade 2 still had its twists and turns, but it was the gameplay systems that really knocked it out of the park. You might be asking yourself, Ed, why are you talking so much about the original games? Well, I think it's important that you understand where this game had its roots, and how it grew from those roots in both fun and not so fun ways. Xenoblade 3 is my least favorite Xenoblade game. I was not engaged with its combat, which after the fast-paced nature of 2 and its expansion Torna, felt sluggish, and I felt it overly relied on the chain attacks, which while cool, started to lose their sheen after doing it for the 100th time. The game's story was okay. I never really found that I was finding the same twists and turns that I was getting in the Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2. But what I did find myself pretty engaged with was the moment-to-moment actions and motivations of my party members. There's a pretty cool moment about halfway through the game where Uni finds out something about her past, and they don't really reference this in the main story at all unless you do some of the side content. It's almost like the entire game's main story was just to put down some threads that you'd follow up later on in side content and side quests. But overall, I think I kind of set myself up for disappointment. I found myself expecting some huge twist to happen at the ending, similar to 1 and 2, and while there were some, I ultimately felt a little disappointed with the end boss and his backstory. But all that being said, this was a solid 70-hour gaming experience for me, and in a similar vein to Mass Effect 3, I truly enjoyed the journey to get to the end. Each chapter's ending where they really saved those big twists and reveals had me surprised, and each emotional character moment was actually pretty touching. I'm not going to say that you should play this game just to experience Chapter 6, but you should probably play this game just to experience Chapter 6. So at the end of the day, I can definitely say that I still love this series. The Xenoblade games have come a long way in the past decade since Xenoblade 1 was released in North America. Who would have thought that we had to fight so hard to get the first one released in North America, and now Xenoblade 2 and 3 are some of the highest selling RPGs on the Nintendo Switch. So while I didn't get everything I wanted from this game, like a damn vehicle so I didn't have to walk everywhere, I still find it one of my favorite games I played this year. Triangle Strategy is another one of those games that really struck me this year. I played the demo a little bit before it came out, and while I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy it, it was just not what I was looking for at the time. It wasn't until actually a few weeks ago that I picked it back up and really got sucked in. Y'all know me, I'm a Fire Emblem stan. It's where I started playing these types of games, so the Final Fantasy Tactics style gameplay isn't something that's immediately appealing or nostalgic for me. Somehow Triangle Strategy managed to really click for me. I would love to say it was the class system, but it's honestly pretty bare bones. You don't get the customization that you do in Fire Emblem Awakening or Three Houses. The characters have their classes and they stick to them. But on the other end of that, each character's class really matches their personality, and the abilities they get from there are actually pretty cool. The story is actually pretty intriguing from the get-go. You're the son of the most powerful lord in the kingdom, second only to the king, and you're about to marry a princess of the neighboring nation as a sign of peace. Then, of course, things go wrong, and you end up having to make hard choices on what to do next. What happens over the next 40 to 50 hours is driven entirely by your decisions, the branching paths, and also the influence you have over your comrades. I actually really enjoyed that aspect of things. When you're given a decision to make and you go to the scales of conviction, which is used by your party to decide where to go next. It's up to you to gather information to help influence others to go with the plan that you think is best. While it doesn't usually matter that much, you can usually just try to have to convince the one undecided member. I actually like talking to each of the different characters and trying to come up with answers that I think would convince them. It made me think about what their characters would think, and it added a sense of a fun kind of puzzle in between battles. I was also pretty impressed with how the game introduces you to new characters and is balanced around you giving them a try. Since experience is maintained even if you fail battles, and experience from battle is scaled based on the recommended level, you can actually raise the level of your characters pretty quickly, allowing you to level up a previously unused character and then kick ass with them. For me, Medina, the apothecary, started off with me completely ignoring her. I just didn't like the idea of someone requiring consumables to be effective. She spent most of the game at the level I got her, like around 10 or 11. It wasn't until the game forced me to have to use her during a spoiler-ish moment that I ended up finding her utility. Whenever she heals with an item, she also increases that person's skill points. For example, mages require 2 skill points at least to use their base spell. So I would like cluster my mages together, use the spell, and then throw that healing item on them, and then they would get a skill point back and get the skill point back from the start of their turn, and then they'd just be able to cast spells every single one of their turns. It created a lot of synergy with my team, and it changed this character from someone I basically ignored to a must-have, even into the final battle. So while I didn't get the same kind of experience at this game as I would maybe a Final Fantasy Tactics or a Tactics Ogre, this game was full of great moments like that, and I ended up wanting to see the story through to the golden route. Yes, I cheated by looking up how to get there. Sue me. Triangle Strategy was the right kind of engaging, challenging, and story-rich, and more than earned a spot on my top 10. Oh Horizon, how the mighty have fallen. What was my number 2 game the year it came out has slipped down into my number 7 for the year. Horizon was one of those games where you just know it when you see it, for good or for ill. Yes, it has robot dinosaurs. That's super cool. When you open the map, there's a bajillion icons to do things, and yes, it is overwhelming. However, you get some super cool traversal abilities like the glider early on, and the ability to swim and dive. But on the other hand, it does take a while to unlock that stuff since it's all gated by the story, so that's definitely less good. It improved upon the combat of the original. Everything feels more natural and precise, but you're still having to run around and gather berries after every battle because you just can't dodge everything that comes at you. Don't get me wrong, I knew exactly what kind of game I was in for when I started Horizon. Fighting robot dinosaurs with my trusty bow? Check. A surprisingly deep world inhabited by interesting characters and tribes? Yep. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Horizon, but it wasn't quite enough of an improvement to break into my top 5 this year, and there's nothing faulting that. I will be very interested to see what Guerrilla does next with this series, because it's one of the few series I'm all in for on the story. The ending of Forbidden West obviously set it up to be a trilogy, so there's a lot of room to grow here and modernize the city. With the first game, you've established something special with the combat, the setting, and the world building. With this game, you've created a stunning visual treat, adding more variety to combat, and gave Aloy traversal abilities that made getting around much more interesting. Now with the third entry, I'd really like to see some more Breath of the Wild influences. Closure to the excellent story and world you've created, and finally, just give me the ability to pick up berries without having to stop my damn mount. I knew I was in for a treat once I punched out my first enemy in Sifu. The somewhat aimless button mashing, the tactile sound, the visuals, I knew this was exactly the type of game that I would love. It's actually a rare treat that I get into brawlers or beat 'em ups. I know they're going to be fun, but I grew up playing RPGs and slow tactical games. These fast-paced games are just a little out of my wheelhouse. That being said, I love Sifu. It manages to combine some of the best feelings of just smashing away enemies with the slow and steady growth of you simply getting better at the game. When you fight these bosses, you get your ass kicked by them, and then eventually, you watch the patterns, learn how to dodge their abilities, and you end up taking them down. However, they've taken you down a lot too, so you're sitting at age 60 about to go on to the next zone, and you know you're going to lose immediately. So you have a choice. You can try to take on the next area, or you can go back and try to kill that boss again, this time without dying as much. It actually is surprisingly enjoyable to do the latter. You kick some butt, practice, get better, and eventually you so satisfyingly defeat the boss in your first attempt without dying. There's nothing better than the feeling of defeating a boss who's kicked your butt so handedly for so long. It's probably why people are so addicted to Souls-likes. But Sifu taught me that I can play fighting games and enjoy them. It's opened up a whole new genre of games for me, and I can't wait to try more. Did y'all know that I actually spend most of my video game time listening to podcasts or watching TV shows? I honestly think it started with the amount of World of Warcraft that I played. When I wasn't raiding, there wasn't really a need to listen to game sound when I was questing or even doing dungeons. So I'd just spend a lot of my game time doing something else as well. When I stopped playing WoW, I still find myself gravitating towards games that let me do this. Xenoblade 3, I would do it between story points, Sifu when replaying over old levels, Triangle Strategy during the battle chapters. Nothing, however, is as more close to a podcast game than Hard Space Shipbreaker. Your job is to take apart pieces of a ship, dispose of them in the right places, and most importantly, pay off your $1 trillion debt to a corporation you're enslaved, a very proud employee of. And that's it. You spend the next 20 or so hours tearing apart ships over and over until you get enough money to finish your contract. Does that sound fun to you? Well, I dare you to give it a try and not find it addicting. And who knows, while you're at it, you can go ahead and finish up that season of Peacemaker you've been meaning to get to. This year was definitely the year of the Steam Deck for me. Suddenly I had access to over 700 games while on the go. You may not know this about me, but I actually travel a lot. I tried all sorts of things to unlock my access to my Steam library on the go. I've installed Windows on my laptop, I've tried to remote play over the internet, but none of it was as good as sitting at home on my computer. When the Switch was released, I gave up trying, and resorted myself to the Switch being my travel game system of choice, and even going so far as to rebuy games on Switch that I had in my Steam library, knowing that I would be more likely to play them there. But now, Valve has graced us with the Steam Deck. Symphony of War wasn't the first game I played on my Steam Deck, but as soon as I saw what type of game it was, I knew it was perfect for the deck. Symphony of War is a beautifully crafted tactical game. While it plays very differently than Fire Emblem or Triangle Strategy, it's the differences that actually lifted up for me. From the beginning, I was strangely into the story, even though it was told using RPG Maker graphics, and played to a lot of, common fantasy tropes. And despite the tactics gameplay seemingly consisting of you throwing yourself at enemies regardless of who dies, I found myself trying to perfect my squads. It just isn't ideal to have a squad full of tanks on your front line. It was more important that your squads were balanced and could strike back. Fire Emblem doesn't have really the same parallels. In Fire Emblem, in general, your characters are either good at dealing damage or good at taking damage. But in this game, you could create an entire squad that was good at both, just by positioning them right. So between this game and Triangle Strategy, this year has opened me up to new, to me at least, tactics genres. So look out, Tactics Ogre, I'm coming for you next. If y'all have been around for long enough, you know that some of my favorite games are puzzlers. Puzzlers that challenge you, don't hold your hand, but don't suddenly scale up the difficulty without warnings. Yes, Baba is you, I'm talking about you. Patrick's Paradox, while obviously pulling inspiration from that game, decides to blow your mind in a different way. The game is all about recursion. You go through levels where you can exit the level you're in, and then you just end up back in the level that you were just in because the level is a block inside the level. Did that make sense to you, or did I just say the word level too much? Either way, this game is masterful at drip feeding you slightly more difficult puzzles until you feel like you've mastered that mechanic, and then they bring you into the next chapter where you'll learn a whole new mechanic. It's very The Witness, where each level is meant to teach you a rule about that chapter's mechanics. But the real genius lies is when they weave in old mechanics while you're learning the new one, so you never really forget the rules of this world. Yeah, sure, I had a few head-scratching moments, but it was simply because I was not seeing what I was supposed to be seeing, not because there was some kind of surprise rule that I hadn't learned yet. Patrick's Parabox is one of the most fun puzzle games I've ever played, and it absolutely deserves to be in my top 3 for this year. Elden Ring quickly became synonymous with Game of the Year, almost from its outset. And how could it not be? An open-world Dark Souls game with a return to form of the RPG mechanics that weren't as prevalent in Bloodborne, and certainly not in Sekiro. So as soon as you step out into the lands between, you're overwhelmed with the sense of grandeur before you, and in classic Dark Souls fashion, you absolutely get demolished by the first enemy you see. Oh man, but being able to go around him and come back when you're 50 levels higher and absolutely destroying him was a feeling I'll likely never forget. Running around, dual-wielding swords became an absolute mainstay in my gaming repertoire for most of the year. I honestly thought I was going to be playing this game all the way into 2023 at the rate I felt like I was going. However, I got COVID back in June, and thus began my 5-day journey into conquering the lands between. I played so much Elden Ring that week, y'all. I was recently reminded of this when I got my Steam replay for 2022, and that showed that 57% of my playtime for Elden Ring was in the month of June. 57% of 150 hours. That's insane. But when it comes down to it, Elden Ring, there's no other way to put it. It is a masterpiece. Riding around on my horse, fighting difficult enemies, rolling to my heart's content, this game left its mark on me in so many ways, and while it's not my number 1 game of the year, it certainly holds a special place in my heart. One that I will remember and revisit one day fondly. It should come as to no surprise to anyone that knows me that Tunic is my number 1 game of this year. Understand this. Tunic is a Zelda-like game with some light Dark Souls elements. Just that alone would have made it great. I loved last year's Death's Door for that exact reason. You play as a cute fox instead of a crow. Your job is to go around killing bosses that hold significant items for progression, and you're exploring an isometric world where everyone just happens to want to kill you. However, hidden beneath the shiny outside of this beautiful graphic game is a secret. For this game isn't just about exploring the world, cutting down strangely beautifully rendered tall grass, and killing monsters. No, the game here is actually to complete the instruction manual. The actual job of the player is to rebuild this instruction manual, unlocking new abilities that you've actually always had, you just didn't know that. The entire game speaks to you in a language you do not understand, and unless you really want to, you don't need to, but it uses symbology and context clues to convey to you what it wants you to learn. Some of the best games I've ever played have done more showing than telling. Just look at Patrick's Parabox, The Witness, and in a way, even games like Super Mario Bros., which teaches you to jump by putting that first Goomba in your way, and games like Bioshock, which use lighting to show you where to go next and where to put your attention. All these games are practicing game design through a term called conveyance, and it's one of the things that actually makes games so addicting, when you realize what the game designer is trying to tell you without him having to say a word. It's a beautiful thing, and this game has it in droves. Tunic is beyond a doubt my favorite game of this year, and I recommend it to everyone that likes and enjoys video games. And that's it for my list of favorite 2022 games. This was kind of a strange year for me. I didn't get as much playing time as I would like, but maybe that'll change next year. There's so many good games coming out next year, so looking forward to that. Cheers to a jam-packed 2023. See y'all later.